Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for today, which is September 20th, 2021. I'm going to talk about what is necessary to do to take on the strategic insanity, which is just cascading on all fronts. But I'm going to take up two topics, one of which will be a follow-up to something we reported last week, which was the new strategic alliance which was announced last week between the U.S., the United Kingdom, and Australia, known as AUKUS. Now, this adds to global instability in many, many ways. It was the announcement that the Australians will be purchasing nuclear submarines from the United States, with the British as a partner in that. In the meantime, they're canceling a long-term contract they had arranged with the French worth anywhere from $40 to $100 billion. And what are the implications of this? Well, first of all, this is global Britain. The British were clearly a leading player in it. The story is that the Australians went to the British and talked to them and said, can you intervene with the United States to get them on board? They negotiated for 18 months before they announced this. Meanwhile, the French thought they still had a deal with the Australians, and that deal was canceled. So for a period of time, we were told that global Britain is dead. After the U.S. failed to notify the British about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that Biden didn't take a call from Boris Johnson for 18 hours, the epitaphs were being written for global Britain. All of a sudden, global Britain is back in a big way. Now, what does this mean for the U.S.? Does it mean that we ended the Afghan war to have a pivot to Asia? Because that's what it appears to be, although that's not really certain yet. What does it mean for Australia? Well, the former opposition leader of Australia said that this means that Australia is going to become an aircraft carrier for the United States. The Chinese said the Australians are going to be a pawn of the United States, and said that they will. This puts them on a target from China. This undermines NATO unity. Now, that's not such a big deal, since NATO is an outmoded concept, and it should have been retired. Trump was right about that. It should have been shut down. Of course, Lyndon LaRouche said that years ago. But meanwhile, you have this push coming from the European Union for a common European defense. How would that work? The European Union takes so long to decide anything. The idea that there could be a common European defense is a bit of a joke. So all of these things represent an escalation of instability. The Chinese are correctly saying this is aimed at them. Biden and others are saying it's not aimed at them, but that's just sophistry. Obviously it is. Now, while this is going on, there continues to be a humanitarian crisis deepening in Afghanistan, which is made worse by the withholding of any aid. There's a little bit of humanitarian aid going through, not much, but the money that should belong to the Afghan government, $9 billion, is still being held by the Federal Reserve. The International Monetary Fund is not freeing the special drawing rights which were pledged to Afghanistan, and so you have a growing crisis within Afghanistan of food insecurity and starvation. Meanwhile, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization met on Friday and Saturday. This was originally set up as a defense organization to counter terror, extremism, and separatism, but they've increasingly taken on an economic component with a bank, a series of development projects, and they pledged, as Putin specifically spoke about in his speech to the SCO, that they will take on a role in providing aid to Afghanistan. Putin talked about the extended Troika meeting. They have a meeting coming up in a few days. What's the extended Troika? China, Russia, the U.S., and Pakistan. And they're going to talk about aid to Afghanistan. So, we have on the one side a move for a new military security alliance, an expansion of the policy of containing China militarily, bringing in Australia, the nuclear submarines For the U.S., this is more money for the military-industrial complex. But this, as I said, adds to instability. The U.S. really should make a full agreement to work with this extended troika to provide not just humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, but economic development. Now, at the same time, you have an escalation of the whole green policy. Many organizing events coming up. One of the slogans is the push for a transition to nature-based economic activity. This is coming from the World Economic Forum, the Davos billionaires, a character named Justin Adams, who's the World Economic Forum Director of Nature-Based Solutions. Now, Adams put out a statement the other day saying half of global GDP comes from nature, but only 0.1% of production, that is metals, food, and transportation, are nature positive. In other words, all the rest of the production that's necessary for human survival goes against nature. This is an absurdity. It's man's creativity that determines what produces economic value. You take man out of the equation, and what do you have? You have a hunter-gatherer society that couldn't support more than a few 100 million people on the earth, if that many. So this whole conception of a nature-based positive policy, or a nature-positive policy, is absurd. It's as absurd as the idea that CO2 is a poisonous gas. But this is what's going to be pushed at 3 conferences coming up. Keep in mind that when you hear about this, Bill Gates has said that we have to phase out beef consumption. Now I'll get to that in a moment. But you have on September 23rd, the World Food Systems Summit. And this is going to be discussing a move toward a nature-positive food system for the world, which means no fertilizer, which means no tractors, probably means only locally consumed production. Again, this is a throwback to the Dark Ages. Then in October, there's going to be an online biodiversity summit. And the idea is a move to ban human activity on land and water. Put aside more land that's not used, more of the oceans, more of the waterways that are unused and untouched by human hands. Again, an absurdity. And then November 1st to the 12th is the COP26 follow-up, the Paris Climate Conference, which is supposed to take place in Glasgow, Scotland, if they can get their act together. Now, leading into this, there was an online summit September 17th of the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate. And this resulted in something called the Global Methane Pledge, which was initiated by the United States and the European Union, calling for a 30% reduction of methane gas by 2030. Now, what's the major source of methane gas pollution? It's the gas emitted by grazing animals. So this is where we go back to Bill Gates, where he says we have to phase out beef consumption. Well, beef consumption and proteins are largely responsible for the increase in life expectancy and the growth of the height, the power of human beings. You take that away and you're back in a situation where we're living on nuts and berries. Now, this is where you see the insanity that's coming out of especially the Western world. In Germany, there's an election next weekend, and there's a push now to have a social democratic green coalition, which the Social Democrats have become totally green. The green candidate is not just for doing away with coal and fossil fuels and nuclear, but she's also for a NATO buildup to confront Russia. So we're dealing with people who are operating with a geostrategic approach, which is war and starvation. And as you reduce the ability of man to feed the populations of the earth, you increase the tensions that lead to war. The solution to all of this is you junk the geopolitical doctrines and you junk the phony green agenda and go back to the emphasis on physical economic production. which is what Lyndon LaRouche has always fought for and always emphasized as the key to not just wealth production, but to peace. Development is the name for peace. So that's my report for today. We had a very interesting discussion on Saturday on the Manhattan Project, which is available at theschillerinstitute.com, where we had Mike Robinson from the United Kingdom presenting some inside background to what's going on with the British war doctrine. So I would encourage people to go to theschillerinstitute.com and look at that. So thanks for joining me. I'll be back with you again tomorrow.